Hello, boys and girls. You say hello to me. Hello, Ms. Marie. Friends, our story today is Davy Crocket, who was a real live person in America. He is one of the legends because he did some tall tales, but he was also pretty famous for exaggerating some of the things that he did and telling stories about it. But this book is The Legendary Frontiersman. So the story of Davy Crocket has been around for a long time, since Davy Crocket, since the Civil War. So that's about 150 years ago. So this book starts, my name is Davy Crocket, and I am a legend of American history. The original ring-tailed roarer of the western woods, I call myself. The yellow blossom of the gum swamp. Woo! I was a beauty. Of course, I was a flesh and blood person, born and lived and loved my wife and babies, and then I passed into the celestial vapors from where I speak. Young folks ought to know their history and how a person gets to be a legend. So these here are the naked green skin facts of my life, and a lot of it is the truth, too. I was born when this land was young, on a river called the Nolichucky, in a wild part of the republic called Tennessee, before they even made it into a state. How wild was it? Well, it was so full of bears that they set up a bear legislature, and you couldn't chop down a tree without bears climbing the stump to give a speech. It was so wild that the only human folks that they let in were Crockets, because a Crocket can grin any wild varmint out of continents. Now, one autumn in my 9th year of life, game had gotten scarce around the home place, so we set off a hunting over Big Sandy Way. Pa had left me in my own charge. Well, wouldn't you know it, but down in a slough I chanced upon a hollow log, and from the inside there came a queer kind of humming, just like the sound your ma and sisters make at a quarter mile away on wash day. I peered in the log, and there beheld a wondrous sight. Beautiful honeycombs, dripping with golden sweetness. That crispy cold fall air had lulled the bees into a snooze. I leaned my rifle against the side of the log and squeezed right in. The bees just rolled over in their little bee beds and kept on a humming, while I partook of a honey feast. By and by, I felt something poking my posteriors like a cold snout of a dog. "Get back now, old Thunder," said I, thinking it was Pa's best hound. But all I heard was a low growl, and then more poking from behind until my face was shoved up into that sticky old mess of honeycomb. "By the great horn spoon," I said to myself, understanding all of a sudden that I was between a bear and his noonday meal. Meantime, snug as we all were, it was warming up in that old hollow log, and those bees had woken up from their slumber. "Bzzz," said the bees. Now, in such a fix as I had to ask myself which I preferred, a full face of bees or a face full of bear. And finally, I reckoned that I might find fairer use for my face on the bear end of things, and vice versa on my posteriors at the bee end. So I scooched about and squoze around until I was a staring that lumbering varmint snout to snout. "Why, how you doing, stranger?" said I, hoping to establish respectful terms right off. "Ain't it a fine day, though?" said the bear. "Why, you are right about that," said I. "And there is nothing on this earth that beats a honey lunch. I can avouch it. because I've just eaten one here in this very log, and there is plenty left. Let others have their blood-soaked viands and their possum innards and their livers and gizzards. Give me sweet, fresh honey every time, said the bear. Well, by now those bees had warmed themselves to a full alertness, and noticing how I had chawed a pretty good portion of their honeycomb, they began to abuse my posteriors with their stingers. It was all I could do not to holler and moan, but I just put on my finest $2 grin and said to the bear, "If you let me crawl out of this here hollow log, kind stranger, you will find a clear path to the fattest honeycombs this side of Sunday." Bzz, bzz, said the bees. "But if you decide to chaw my head off instead, why then my frozen carcass will just plug up this log and you'll have to wait until spring to have your treat." "Hmm," said the bear. Apparently he was studying the matter, all the while those bees used my straggling hams for target practice, and it felt like my pants were peppered with bird shot. "Make up your gosh darn mind, stranger," I cussed that bear. "Chaw my head off or let me pass." Wouldn't you know, he slid out, and I crawled none too gingerly to the opening, my hindermost quarters nearly aflame with bee stings. "Stand fast now," I told that bear. I guess his civility had found itself at last, for he did as I asked, and was all smiles about it too. But no sooner did I pop my swollen posteriors from that olive gum log like a cork from a jug than the swarm of bees busted out. Angry is not the word to describe their frame of mind. They were out for scalps, and seeing that hulking figure of a bear, they at once beset the poor critter like a thunderstorm a-swarming over the peak of old Baldy Mountain, and both bear and bees lit out of the slough like lightning. I never did see that particular bear again, though I knew many more just like him. Well, by and by I grew up, and I married pretty Polly Findlay, and together we had a mess of daughters. But the hunting grew scarcer, and so we moved to Elk River country further west. They called it the Shakes because the earthquake of 1811 struck hard there. One fine afternoon at the place called Tim's Ford, I came across an old Tom Possum peacefully sunning himself against a glade of prickly ash. I clapped the breech of brown Betsy directly on my shoulder and would have sent a charge of lead a-whistling his way, but he lifted up a paw and stopped me from firing. "Is your name Crocket?" he asked. "Why, burn my breeches if I'm not Davy Crocket to the very bone," said I. "You needn't take my further trouble, for I consider myself as good as shot," the possum said, and at once he waddled out of the prickly ash, declaring, "Show me your skillet, and I shall jump right in it." I stooped down to pat the little varmint's noggin. "May I be skinned myself before I harm a hair on your head," said I, "for I never had such a compliment in all my days. Get along now and live a good, clean possum life." And off he waddled with my blessings. Well, it was along about that same year that General Andy Jackson recruited us to fight the Red Sticks down Albany way after they burnt down Fort Mims. I went, and old Hickory, as they called Jackson, made me a colonel. But I saw much that disgusted me in that war, and I never did hold with chasing tribes from their rightful lands in a cheating way. It put me and General Jackson at a permanent variance, and when I came home from the war, I got into politics. By then, Tennessee had become a state. Human beings came to edge out bears, so my neighbors asked me to run for Congress. I reckon I had learned enough about stump speaking from the bears to go ahead and electioneer, so I did. But votes were precious scarce in the district, and I had to hunt 'em up with every which way I could. So another time I was a riding Broadhorn down the Mississippi when I came across a fellow floating downstream in the stern of his keelboat, fast asleep, with a jug between his legs. "Hello, stranger," I hollered, out of warning. "Wake up now, before she runs away on you." He didn't stir a whisper. So as I floated past, I gave him a jab with my steering oar. "Woo!" he said, coming to life. Who asked you to scratch my lice?" "You're heading straight for snags," I informed him. "Shut up before your teeth get sunburnt," he said, looking up all squinty-eyed. "I don't value you more than a chaw of plug tobacco." "What?" said I, growing wolfry at his impudence. "Come ashore, then, and I shall give you a severe licking." He ran his boat plumb into shore, and I followed up on the Broadhorn. Wouldn't you know that 8 more brawny fellows climbed out of his cabin and sprang to shore. "Who are these?" I asked. "Why, these here are my twin brothers," he said, "and we always fight as one." I had never seen such a mess of twins before, and it made me 8 times as wolfy, so we went straight to the licking. They weren't right smart varmints, too, but I gave them a frightful beating in reverse size order until they cried "stop" at each note of the scale. "Stop, stop, 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 stop." "You are a rip starver," the oldest twin declared. "If I knew your name, I'd vote for you in election." "It's Crocket," said I, "and I'm standing for Congress on this very district." "Why, then my brothers and I shall cast as many ballots for you as they will allow," he said, and we all parted fast friends. Well, I was elected and served 3 terms in Washington, but I ran head on into my old adversary, Andy Jackson, who had become president by then. We butted horns at every turn, on cheap lands for the Western squatters, on breaking treaties we signed with the Cherokee. Politics was sad work. Finally, they spent $25 a vote to defeat me in the election. "Congress can go to perdition," I roared. "I'm a-going to Texas." Now, at the time, Texas was still owned by Mexico. Of course, for years, the Mexican government had invited Americans to settle up in Texas so as to tame it for them. And they said, "Here's 100,000 acres each. Senor Yankee Doodle, come on down and be a part of this here country." And settle they did. It was a garden spot. I had great hopes of making my family's fortune there. By and by, the Americans said, "Why, there's enough of us here to start a government of our own, and we'll call it the Republic of Texas." And the Mexicans didn't like that. They fixed to run this rebellion into a gopher hole, and that's how I came to be at the Alamo. The Alamo was an old Spanish church down in San Antonio de Bejar that the Mexicans had used as a fort. Well, the Texans had come and pitched them out, and the Mexicans didn't like that either. And they sent a whole army to swap it back. The Texans cried out for help, and I showed up with my 12 Tennessee volunteers none too soon. And they were less than 200 of us in all. General Santa Anna had almost 7,000 troops camped close by on the Medina River. Our commander was the gallant Colonel William Travis. The enemy sent a message asking for his surrender, but he answered with a cannon shot. They kept us buttoned up in that old Alamo for 13 days, hurling cannon shot at the walls night and day. But we did not lose a man. Before long, we defenders of the Alamo were living on nothing but pure hope. Trying to keep spirits up, I climbed right up on top of the ramparts and flapped my arms and crowed like a rooster. "Cock-a-doodle-doo," I collared. "I am half alligator, half horse, and half snapping turtle with a touch of earthquake shown in, and I have got the closest shooting rifle, the ugliest coon dog, the roughest racking horse, and the prettiest wife in the state of Tennessee. I can whip my weight in wildcats, ride a streak of lightning through your crabapple patch, put a rifle ball between the horns of the moon, and outsnare all the Frenchmen in New Orleans. I can run faster, squat lower, dive deeper, stay under longer, and come out drier than any man this side of the Big Muddy. A hush fell amongst them Mexicans out of the darkness. I can walk like an ox, run like a fox, howl like a wolf, hug like a bear, bite like a crocodile, swim like an eel, out scream a panther, fight like a chickasha, beat the devil at cards, and don't mind being frozen more than a rotten apple. Tired and hungry as they were, the men of the Alamo laughed and slapped their knees. I can grin a hurricane out of countenance, recite the Bible from Genesee to Christmas, blow the wind of liberty through a squash vine, tote a steamboat on my back, frighten the old folks, suck 40 rattlesnake eggs in one sitting, and swallow General Santa Anna whole without choking if you butter his head and pin his ears back. The boys on the ramparts gave a yell of delight, but mostly they were just less frightened. A good round of brag almost always fortifies the heart. I'm an animal made of hard knocks, I kept a boasting, a horse that was never broke, a man of gumption with bark on. I don't wear my collar around my neck, nor plow another man's furrow. I'm first rate and a half and a little past common. I stand up on the rack, fodder or no fodder. I am the yellow blossom of the gum swamp, and I wish that I may be shot if I do not go ahead to the very last. I shall never surrender or retreat. Hooray for Crocket, the men cried. Hooray for Texas! To be truthful, I'd given that same speech in Congress many times, but to much less effect. It warmed my heart to see 'em boys buck up. Well, those Mexicans came at us, starting both dawn on the 13th day, their trumpets blaring and their cannons roaring. Twice we beat 'em back, but finally they swarmed over the walls and put every last defender to the sword. But in the end, of course, Texas prevailed. We lost the battle, but we won the war. And that's how I became a legend. Where I am now, it's always springtime in the Smokies, and I have all day to roam and hunt and run with my dogs and politic with the varmints of the woods. At the end of the day, my pretty Polly's awaiting in the cabin door with supper on the table and the youngsters round her skirts. I am eternally happy to be who I am, which is Davy Crocket, the original ring-tailed roarer of the western woods, the yellow blossom of the gum swamp. And there was a television show called The Davy Crocket Show. It used to be on Disney back when I was a little girl, 107 years ago. I was just doing a little brag like Davy Crocket there, but it goes like this. Born on a mountaintop in Tennessee, greenest day in the land of the free, raised in the woods so he knew every tree, killed him a bar when he was only 3. Davy Crocket, king of the wild frontier. So that's probably on YouTube, the old television shows. So friends, that legend about Davy Crocket is an old legend. It's been made up, although he was a real life person and he really did serve in Congress. And supposedly he actually fought bears as a young man. There are no pictures, so I don't know if that's true. But this book that we were reading was illustrated by Steve Brodner. Friends, I will see you next time. Goodbye, boys and girls. And you say goodbye to me. Goodbye, Ms. Murray. Bye, friends.